There we go.
Okay. All right. Well, now I'm sweating because we're recording. I was. Let me move a window out of the way here. Can everybody see just my slide on the screen here?
Yes, we can.
All right, wonderful. That's so wonderful to hear all of those familiar names. I feel like I did come to Diana and ask her about this program, but it was like stepping into a very fast-moving river because the Maryland Women's Heritage Center has these wonderful, all the like they call them pieces, but it's just this beautiful flow of these stories that flow together on people and experts that are coming together to tell this greater story. And so it's been this wonderful experience just working with the center this year. And I work at a museum devoted to a man, voted to Edgar Allan Poe, but to be able to take this most poetical year and talk about the women in the Poe family, it really was a revelation. And having the opportunity to just the lectures that came from a lot of the experts from the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, I learned so much about the state. I learned so much.
Enrica, we can't hear you. Can you come forward to your speaker?
A little better?
No.
All right, let me try one thing here. Stopping share, 1 second, let me see.
You started off loud.
Yeah, but then it faded away.
No, we still can't hear you.
Microphones, how's that?
Yes, yes.
A little better? Okay,
Yes.
all right. So
Thank you.
What I was saying is that it has really been an incredible experience working with the center, and a lot of the names that Diana mentioned, we're very fortunate to have them come and talk about the program. So I'm going to ask a favor of the moderator. Please let me know when I only have about 5 minutes left, and that way I'll know what I need to jump forward to, just in case I'm running out of time here. So the Virginia Poe Bicentennial 2022 was the 200th birthday of Virginia Poe, the wife and muse of Edgar Allan Poe. And again, I work at a museum entirely devoted to the works of a man, an incredible author, one of my absolute favorites. I'm a recovering English major, so this is really a dream job for me. But having an opportunity to learn more about the Poe family, having an opportunity to really delve into hidden parts, obscure parts of Poe's story, because the women in the Poe family not talked about often, of course, because Poe's story is so large, larger than life, but also seeing how many Poe scholars, people devoted to looking at Poe's story, often miss these figures. And it's a very familiar story to know that a woman's role may have been just kind of forgotten or kind of pushed to the side, not considered important. So looking at the story, actually taking the time to ask these questions has yielded some very important things and really even transformed the story we tell about Poe at Poe House. So this year, not only with the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, but working with Westminster Hall and Burying Ground, the place where Poe and other members of the Poe family, including Virginia, are buried, and then also working with the Bronx County Historical Society in New York. Poe in his lifetime never owned property. Now that he's dead, you can visit 3 of the houses that he lived in, and the Poe house in Baltimore is just one of them, the only one that survives here in the city. You can go up to Philadelphia, there's a Poe house there, but you can go up to New York and there's the cottage in the Bronx, and that's where Virginia passed away. But we'll be getting into her story. A little bit about Poe Baltimore. I am the executive director at Poe House. Poe Baltimore is the nonprofit organization created to fund, maintain, and interpret Poe House. We keep Poe House open to visitors from around the world. So plug for the museum to come out to West Baltimore and see the house where Poe lived. But we are also dedicated to celebrating Edgar Allan Poe's legacy. in popular culture, how Poe continues to shape popular culture, really drawing a direct line from the writing to the present day. That's another very big part of what we do at Poe House. So 620 square feet, the Poe House Museum, but we do have the International Edgar Allan Poe Festival. We offer awards every year to a new generation of artists and writers inspired by Poe. And then we take on these wonderful projects and programs, and the Virginia Poe Bicentennial was one of these. Diana did a wonderful job talking about Maryland's Women's Heritage Center, Westminster Hall, again, where Poe is buried. And then if you have an opportunity to go up to the Poe Cottage in the Bronx, Bronx County Historical Society, we want to thank them for their partnership this year. If you're interested in seeing some of the videos from our lecture series this past year, starting in January, we released a series of videos every month talking about a different facet of Virginia Poe's story and the Poe family story. If you visit our YouTube channel, the Poe Baltimore on YouTube, you can see some of those videos. And we do have a few more of those coming. They've been caught up in editing, but a few more of those will be on the way. But each month we explored either the poetry from Virginia Poe, the role of mother, the role of mothers in the Poe family, the role of mourning, the role of marriage, the different controversies around the Poe marriage. But there's a lot to take in, and it's going to take up way more than the little bit of time I have to share with you this afternoon. But if you are interested in learning more, please visit our YouTube channel. So today, I would like to talk about the high points, major points of Virginia Poe's life and afterlife, and the significance, her significance to her husband's work, why it's very important to ask this question, not just 200th birthday, she's doing pretty well for 200 years, but why it's important to actually explore her story. Then we'll talk about the age of consent, and my title here is a little bit, subtitle here is a little bit misleading. She was 13 years old when she marries Edgar Allan Poe. We will, of course, be talking about that as a controversial part of the history, but also how we view her story now, how in this age of consent, how many more questions about autonomy, many more questions about a woman's rights, a woman's voice, what she was really thinking, how much of that has actually been lost, and how truly important it is to talk about that. So we will talk a bit about consent and what we don't know about how Virginia felt about all of this. And then behind every man, again, one of the very special things that came out of our discussions this past year, the role of women, how women in the Poe family actually made Edgar Allan Poe's career possible, and why that's so important to share their story as well. So I hope we can get through all of that, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to stay a little bit after to answer any questions. Quick plug for the Edgar Allan Poe House. We are open weekly for tours every Thursday through Sunday. We are on a reservation-only basis. You can visit our website, poebaltimore.org, to learn more about our programs and to make a reservation at Poe House. And if you do, please be sure to say hello. Let me know that you were part of our presentation. Can everybody still hear me? Okay, for now. Okay, let me make sure. All right, so Edgar Allan Poe, obviously one of the world's most famous authors, known for Gothic works like The Fall of the House of Usher, Cask of Amontillado, The Telltale Heart, these kind of Gothic tales. And another reason I think I was picked for October is because it's almost Halloween, so it's a really good time to kick off our Halloween season, spooky time, especially here in Baltimore. Poe known, of course, also for poetry. His most famous work, arguably The Raven, a story that captured the imagination of the nation, captured the imagination of the world, made him so very famous. Of course, the Baltimore Ravens, named the only NFL team in the league named for a poem. So it gives you a sense of just how important for the city of Baltimore. Poe, also the father of detective fiction. Many people do not realize that Poe was the inventor of the detective story. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and the author Sherlock Holmes credits Poe with setting the template for the detective story. So that means any mystery novel you've ever read, any police procedural you've ever seen on television has a direct line to Poe, even animation like Scooby-Doo. It's not that there were no such thing as mysteries before Edgar Allan Poe, but Poe creates a character at the heart of a story whose job it is to solve that mystery by way of a process called ratiocination, but deductive reasoning, step by step, looking at clues. This is an invention of Poe's, and all mystery novels stemming this type of character. Any story you've seen with this type of character at its heart has to start with Poe. So when you think about how Poe has shaped popular culture, he really does have an outsized impact. Of course, our mission at Poe House here in Baltimore, he did live a number of different places up and down the East Coast, but his father's family from Baltimore, very close ties to the city of Baltimore. And even though Edgar is raised by a foster family in Richmond, Virginia, the Allan family, that's how we get the name Edgar Allan Poe, Poe was a true Poe. Father's family from Baltimore. Grandparents served in the Revolution. Poe's grandfather, known to the Marquis de Lafayette, as well as George Washington, a true patriot, contributed quite a bit of money to the Revolutionary War cause. His wife Elizabeth sewed 500 pairs of pants for the Marquis de Lafayette soldiers. So this is very much a Baltimore story, a Baltimore family, and Poe finds refuge with his blood relatives here in the city of Baltimore. This is how he comes to live at the Edgar Allan Poe House. And so we do talk about Poe's connection to the city of Baltimore. A very big part of what we do at Poe House. Now, Poe himself.
Enrica, you're getting a little quieter again. Can you up the mic?
I can try. Let's see.
Your voice is fading and it's hard to hear it. Plus, maybe you could talk a little bit slower. That might help.
Okay. I will try here.
Yeah.
Let me see. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So Poe then is the one who really draws a direct line from his work to, from his life to his work, and that Poe himself says that the death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetical topic in the world. When he writes this, when he writes The Raven, he has a beautiful dying wife at home. Virginia Poe, he marries her when she is quite young, but then later she starts to exhibit symptoms of her illness about 5 years into the couple's marriage. She lingers over another period of 5 years. And so this is something cataclysmic and quite awful that's going on in Poe's life at the time he is writing some of the works that eventually do make him world famous, even in his lifetime. So it is Edgar Allan Poe that draws this line to the woman in his life, and we don't think it's coincidence that he feels this way when his wife, unfortunately, is at home dying of consumption, tuberculosis. We have a quote here from Edgar Allan Poe, from one of his letters to his wife, really giving a sense of just how important she was to him. Now, I hope everybody has someone in their life penning a missive like this to them, telling them how important they are. But for Edgar Allan Poe to share this sentiment with his wife, to tell her how important she was to him, gives you a sense of just how much he did, in fact, care for her. And Virginia Poe, we do not have very many statements in her own words. The only piece of writing that survives from Virginia Poe herself is an acrostic Valentine that she writes to her husband, a poem with her husband's name, the initials of his name, leading to the lines of that poem. That is the only poem that we have from Virginia Poe, the only work in her words. But quotes from her, from their friends, it seems that Virginia Poe also very devoted to her husband, whatever the controversy of their union. And again, very famous in Poe's history, in Poe's biography, because she was dying, because it took her quite a while to die. And his devotion to her seemed to either spur or hasten a lot of the destruction at the end of his own life. So this is a reason that we do talk about Virginia Poe. It is a sort of a doorway into what was going on in that relationship and the controversy surrounding their marriage. Another reason quite why it's important for just Poe scholarship to look at her as a figure. So looking at sort of the major points, this is a timeline of the major milestones of Virginia Poe's short life to one of the world's most renowned writers. Virginia Poe is born in Maryland, August 15th, 1822. She marries her first cousin, Edgar Allan Poe, when she's 13 years old. And over the next 10 years, the couple live in 3 different cities as Poe pursues life as a writer and an editor in various magazines. Again, 5 years into their marriage, she falls quite ill. She is at the piano playing and singing to the family when she bursts a blood vessel in her throat. And these are the first signs of consumption. Now, she, over the next 5 years, gets better, gets worse, gets better, gets worse. And this does have a devastating effect on her husband. Edgar writes of this period that Virginia would hover at the edge of death only to be revived and seemingly healed, and then swing back again like the proverbial pendulum. During this time, her husband captures the imagination of the nation with The Raven, other Gothic works that feature dying, beautiful women, and makes him popularly famous. Now, fame does not equal fortune for any member of the Poe family. But he does become quite famous in his lifetime, and for better or for worse, various scandals plague the family towards the end of Poe's life. But this period of time does seem to exasperate a lot of the destruction that Poe kind of even brings upon himself, struggling with alcoholism through his later years. Now, Virginia does die in January 1847 in New York, shivering to death under her husband's West Point cloak and a cat at her feet. The family is so poor, in fact, that Virginia has to be buried in the landlord's family plot in this local cemetery in New York. And the image that you saw of Virginia Poe at the very beginning of my presentation is the only true portrait known to exist of Virginia Poe, and it is her death portrait. Now you will see, if you Google images of Virginia Poe, you'll see lots of images of the face kind of turned to the left, kind of staring into the middle distance, and that's because it is a death portrait, and many of them are copies, but it is the only true image we actually have of Virginia Poe known to have been a likeness copied in her presence. Now, would that her story had ended there. Virginia Poe and the Poes do not rest easy in any place that they are buried. We were very fortunate to be able to meet at Westminster Hall in Baltimore City, several steps away from where Edgar and Virginia are buried. But it took a while for them to finally reach that final resting place. Edgar Allan Poe buried no fewer than 3 times in the cemetery at Westminster Hall. And if anybody's interested in just how that came to happen, why he was moved around so much, I'll stay behind and tell that story. But even Virginia Poe precedes her husband in death by 2 years, buried in a completely different state, and yet manages to find her way back to Baltimore. Part of this is because that cemetery where she's buried with her landlord is set for demolition to be dug up and redeveloped for commercial property. And so a Poe scholar, William Gill, when he learns that Virginia Poe's grave is about to be lost, probably more for Edgar's sake than Virginia's, he steps in. And the story goes that he got to the cemetery just in time when the sexton is digging up the bones. and manages to rescue some of her remains. But with nowhere to put them, he keeps them in a small box under his bed for several years. And that is how eventually, when Poe is given his new monument, Virginia finally makes her way to Baltimore and is laid by her husband's side. So if you do go to Westminster Hall, I highly recommend the visit. If you walk around the Poe monument, you will see two other names inscribed on either side of the monument. The first is Virginia, his wife, to his left, and then his mother-in-law / aunt. Did I mention that Virginia Poe was his first cousin when he married her when she's 13? Muddy Maria, his aunt, is now also buried at his side, which was her dying wish. So the strange afterlife of Virginia Poe, something that out of a story that Edgar Allan Poe himself might have written, how his wife ends up at his side, but they are reunited again and again this year, an opportunity to really look into the controversy of their union. So here's where we get into age of consent. What happens? Why did Edgar Allan Poe marry his 13-year-old cousin? What's going on in this story? And is it just another story of another famous man doing something unsavory, and then the story gets kind of whitewashed and put away? Or was there something more to the story? And what were her thoughts about this? What were her feelings about this? This is something, Virginia's thoughts, Virginia's perspective, sadly missing from really any of the biographies about Edgar Allan Poe. It's accepted that because her mother consented, that is why this union happens. It's kind of icky, but just sort of accepted that Poe marries a 13-year-old girl. So we use this year as an opportunity to really delve in and try to give an unflinching look. What's going on with the family? Now, I want to say, I can't make the story less creepy. And we do try to, even at Poe House, be very clear that there is no defense of what there are serious moral issues in any age of a 26-year-old man marrying a 13-year-old girl, even if marrying a first cousin, more common in that day and age. But I can share with you what's going on for the family at the time. And I can talk to you about some of the other players in the story and the decisions that they make. So in order to talk about Virginia Poe, we do have to also talk about another woman in the picture, which is Maria Poe Clem, Virginia's mother and Edgar's aunt. And I'm going to read a quote from the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore. Poe's aunt, and after he married his cousin, Virginia, his mother-in-law, Poe called her Muddy. Although there is some debate as to whether or not she was a positive influence on Edgar, there seems no doubt that she cared for him like a son, and that Poe certainly thought of her as a mother. This is the first paragraph from Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore, page on Maria Clem, Poe's aunt. And as we just heard, the devotion of the Poe women who made quite a bit possible for the young writer. And we'll talk about this story. It seems that Edgar was quite devoted to his aunt. Again, raised by a foster family in Richmond, Poe eventually becomes estranged from the Allan family. A family of some wealth, a family of some privilege. Poe, a foster son, never formally adopted, eventually comes to sort of personality blow and differences with his foster father and is cast away from them. Having nowhere else to go, Poe finds refuge with his blood relatives here in Baltimore, and it's his aunt Maria who takes him in. Now, whether or not she does this out of love for her brother's son, whether she does this out of family obligation, it's very clear that the Clem family in Baltimore, they don't have a lot of money. They don't have very much to share. And yet Edgar is welcomed into his aunt's home, treated as a son, cared for as a son, and the family do become quite close. Now, when Edgar joins the family, Virginia is only about 10 or 11 years old. But all of them living together, Maria Clem is caring for her own ailing mother, Elizabeth Cairns Poe, again, the woman who sewed 500 pairs of pants to the Marquis de Lafayette soldiers. She's caring for her ailing mother. She has 2 children of her own, Virginia and her own son, Henry. And for a brief time, she's also caring for Edgar's older brother, Henry, also a nephew. So this is a woman who seems to open her doors to the various members of the family. And again, a very modest means, no stranger to poverty, no stranger to even begging some of her late husband's acquaintances for help for the family. Welcomes her nephew into the household. And later, when Edgar would write a poem called To My Mother to his aunt, you can see just from the sentiment here, just how he felt for her. Now, it's while Edgar is living with the family that it seems that there is a discussion about caring for Virginia, perhaps even marrying Virginia when Virginia gets older. It's unclear how soon the union was going to happen, but it certainly does seem clear that they were at least talking about the issue. It's when the family is living at 203 Amity Street, today the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum, that Poe's grandmother passes away. And when she passes away, the pension that had sustained the family also goes away too. So the family is at a crossroads. The family, without financial means to stay in the home, and really unsure about what their future should be. Edgar, in the meantime, has won a prize for writing that kind of he launched his career, and he begins an editorship in Richmond, Virginia. And while he is away from the city, a cousin makes an offer. Nielsen Poe makes an offer to Maria Clem and her daughter Virginia, offers to take in the daughter Virginia, raise her, enter her into society, educate her, give her an opportunity at a life that perhaps Maria might not be able to offer her daughter on her own. Now, it seems the family had been aware of Edgar's proposal to marry Virginia, but did not seem to really like this idea, and everyone felt she was a little too young for such a thing. So Nielsen Poe, a younger though more established member of the family, a cousin in the city, his offer to take in Virginia is very, very tempting for the family. But there's some question about whether or not her mother is part of the deal. So Maria has a choice. She can either take Nelson's offer, or she can ask her nephew what his intentions are, what he thinks they should do. The video I'm about to show you, I hope I've got, Pam, how am I doing on time?
It's about 5 minutes after 2. This class goes to 2:30, but you want to leave space for some questions at the end. So I'd say 15 minutes you have left.
I think we have some time here. So the video I'm going to play you is Edgar Allan Poe's actual proposal to Virginia by way of a letter to her mother. We'll play that now.
Well, hello, my name is Dean Knight, and I am the programs coordinator here at the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. You know, people, as you know, Enrica, people associate Poe with Baltimore more than with Richmond. But, you know, we tell people, this is where he's from. When Poe did move back here as an adult in 1835, It was after living in Baltimore for 4 years. As you know, of course, he lived in 2 different houses, one house in what is now Little Italy, I believe, and then the house that you're in charge of in what was then, kind of the western outskirts or suburbs of the city. And for all of those 4 years, he was living with family, with biological Poe family. And, I've always thought that's a major reason why he moved to Baltimore in the first place, because he didn't really want to come back here because of his problems with John Allan. He was looking for family, and so he looked to his biological family. And Baltimore was unquestionably by far the single best place for Edgar Poe to look for biological family, because they're all there. So he moves into this house with a whole bunch of his family members, including his own brother, and his aunt and her daughter, and a couple other people as well. And so for these next 4 years, he's surrounded by family, fewer as time goes on, but that core trio of Poe and Maria Clem and Virginia, it gets established, I think, pretty early on in the Baltimore years, 1831 to 35. So any context of thinking about Poe's marriage and the circumstances around that should keep that in mind. He'd gone to Baltimore in search of family. Of course, there's also a bigger city and there's more publishing opportunities, et cetera, as we've already talked about. But he's looking for family, and he creates family in Baltimore. And, he establishes this family. And then when he moves back down here to Richmond, he moves alone at first. But then he learns that another Poe family member, Nelson Poe, has offered to take in at least Virginia, if not Virginia and Maria Clem as well. And this deeply disturbs Poe. He doesn't want to lose this family that he's created. And so that's when he writes this letter that we're taking a look at.
August 29th. My dearest Auntie, I am blinded with tears while writing this letter. I have no wish to live another hour. Amid sorrow and the deepest anxiety, your letter reached, and you well know how little I am able to bear up under the pressure of grief. My bitterest enemy would pity me could he now read my heart. My only hold on life is cruelly torn away. I have no desire to live, and will not. But let my duty be done. I love Virginia passionately, devotedly. I cannot express in words the fervent devotion I feel towards my dear little cousin, my own darling. But what can I say? Oh, think for me, for I am incapable of thinking. All of my thoughts are occupied with the supposition that both you and she will prefer to go with N. Poe. I do sincerely believe that your comforts will, for the present, be secured. I cannot speak as regards your peace, your happiness. You have both tender hearts, and you will always have the reflection that my agony is more than I can bear, that you have driven me to the grave, for love like mine can never be gotten over. It is useless to disguise the truth that when Virginia goes with N.P. that I shall never behold her again. That is absolutely sure. Pity me, my dear Auntie, pity me. I have no one now to fly to. I am among strangers, and my wretchedness is more than I can bear. It is useless to expect advice from me. What can I say? Can I, in honor and in truth, say, Virginia, do not go. Do not go where you can be comfortable and perhaps happy. And on the other hand, can I calmly resign my life itself? If she had truly loved me, would she not have rejected the offer with scorn? Oh, God have mercy on me! If she goes with N.P., what are you to do, my own Auntie? I had procured a sweet little house in a retired situation on Church Hill, newly done up and with a large garden and every convenience, at only $5 a month. I have been dreaming every day and night since of the rapture I should feel in having my only friends, all I love on earth, with me there, and the pride I would take in making you both comfortable, and in calling her my wife. But the dream is over. Oh, God have mercy on me. What have I to live for? Among strangers, with not one soul to love me. The situation has this morning been conferred upon another, Branch T. Saunders. But White has engaged to make my salary $60 a month, and we could live in comparative comfort and happiness. Even the $4 a week I am now paying for board would support us all. But I shall have $15 a week, and what need would we have of more? I had thought to send you on a little money every week until you could either hear from Hall or William Poe, and then we could get a little furniture for a start, for White will not be able to advance any. After that, all would go well. Or I would make a desperate exertion and try to borrow enough for that purpose. There is little danger of the house being taken immediately. I would send you on $5 now, for White paid me the $8 2 days since, but you appear not to have received my last letter, and I am afraid to trust it to the mail, as the letters are continually robbed. I have it for you, and will keep it until I hear from you, when I will send it, and more if I get any in the meantime. I wrote you that William Poe had written to me concerning you, and has offered to assist you, asking me questions concerning you, which I answered. He will beyond doubt aid you shortly, and with an effectual aid. Trust in God. The tone of your letter wounds me to the soul. Oh, Auntie, you loved me once. How can you be so cruel now? You speak of Virginia acquiring accomplishments and entering into society. You speak in so worldly a tone. Are you sure she would be more happy? Do you think anyone could love her more dearly than I? She will have far, very far better opportunities of entering into society here than with NP. Everyone here receives me with open arms. Adieu, my dear Auntie. I cannot advise you. Ask Virginia. Leave it to her. Let me have, under her own hand, a letter bidding me goodbye forever, and I may die. My heart will break, but I will say no more. EAP. Kiss her for me, 1,000,000 times.
So what does one do in the face of such an appeal? And again, we do not have Virginia's response to this 13-year-old girl reading such romantic and desperate. It truly is a desperate letter, a very emotional letter from Edgar Allan Poe to her about the life that they could have. And this is Mariah's choice for herself and her daughter. Up to this point, mistress of her own home, few rights as a woman alone. Virginia coming to an age where 13-year-old girls, even at this age, beginning to be expected to contribute to the family. An a pliant, grateful nephew who is proposing a life for all of them versus a life without her daughter. And so this is the choice that Mariah is faced with, and we know the choice that she made because Virginia does marry Edgar, and the three of them do make a home for the rest of their lives. There is no place that the couple goes that mom isn't part of the deal. And even after Virginia dies and Mariah survives everyone, it seems it's Edgar's intention to keep her as part of his life, even when he is courting and marrying again. It was her dying wish to be buried next to her darling Eddie, and when he is given his new monument at Westminster Hall, she is moved to his side as well as Virginia, and you'll see her name inscribed in the stone as well. So we cannot know Virginia's thoughts, that she didn't put them down. We do know that the couple very loving. We do know that Edgar himself draws this line from his work to his home life. And what's going on cannot be coincidence. But as we sort of piece these things together, there's still just the understanding that we can never know her, but we can see certainly how what happens with the family does affect his life. So behind every great man, as the saying goes. Our work this past year to examine the often obscure figure of Virginia Poe in Edgar Allan Poe's biography has yielded some very important realizations, even for this historian at Poe House. Way leads on to way. Poe's mother's renown as an actress puts Edgar on the path of the Allan family, who raise him and educate him. Poe's grandmother's service in the Revolution leads to the pension that sustained the Clem household, made it possible for Edgar to come and live with the family and start writing. Poe's aunt, Maria, cares for Edgar's older brother, who is also a writer, and then Henry dies, cares for Edgar, giving him this opportunity to pursue this life. He does not have family money. He does not have another career. He's one of the first American writers to support himself entirely by his pen. And Maria's consent to Edgar for their marriage, for the marriage to Virginia, and their keeping house sustained the entire family in grievous times, even in times where Edgar seemed intent to destroy himself and everything around him. So these are the things that came out of this wonderful collaboration this past year with Maryland Women's Heritage Center. And again, so many more facets of this story that it took an entire year, has taken an entire year to really explore. And I invite you to find us on YouTube. But those of you out there, you can visit the Poes. The Virginia Poe Bicentennial Death Exhibit has been split into 2 different parts. If you would like to go visit Virginia, you can go see her at the Laurel Museum through November. It is free to visit that museum. You'll want to check their website for some times and dates, but the Virginia Poe exhibit is there. If you'd like to see the man himself, the Edgar Allan Poe Death Exhibit is going to be at the Howard County Historical Society through November, also a place that you can go visit for free. And then, of course, as ever, you can come to the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum every Thursday through Sunday here in Baltimore. And we hope that you do.
Let me switch it back to the gallery view and ask for questions. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful, quick history of this family. And I think that people probably have questions. Let's see. Terry, do you have one?
I don't see any hands up yet.
Yes,
No,
Terry.
actually, Pam knows me. I always have questions, right?
Yes, right.
Thank you for that presentation. A question that I would have is there any marked change, do you think, in Edgar Allan Poe's either choice of topic or in his writing from before Virginia becomes ill and after she becomes ill? Let's say 1942 or 43, I guess she becomes ill.
That's a very good question. Poe, one of the special things about the Edgar Allan Poe house is that this is the house where Poe begins to write short stories. We have poetry dating back to Poe's teens, and he was always infatuated with women, talked of women to Helen, a number of different pieces in his poetry. And I grin about it. I was one of those teenagers scribbling in a notebook, poetry in a notebook too, but Edgar was one of those. And we have poetry dating back to his teens. It's when he comes to Baltimore that he begins to write short stories. And it's in the home where he's living with Virginia too, where that coincidentally begins to happen. So his work is Gothic almost immediately. So that seems to predate Virginia. But there is a lot of discussion in Poe's work in Philadelphia. His most prolific time, like the most productive work, where you see The Masque of the Red Death, you see, what's another one I'm thinking of? I believe Fall of the House of Usher, these kinds of things. And again, this is about the time that Virginia begins to display these symptoms of her illness. One of our presenters this past year, Dr. Amy Armiento, talked about women in Poe's work as the wronged revenant, this kind of dying women and everything kind of falling apart around them. And so because he was always Gothic, I don't think it's fair to say that there's a deliberate kind of like shift immediately, but he certainly stayed Gothic, and he certainly this continued. It wasn't something that when Poe was asked why he wrote such Gothic things, his very flippant answer when he's a younger man is to say it's going to sell. It sells, but he certainly does become more serious as time goes on, and these things don't go away. Certainly. I hope that answered your.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
I'm assuming there are no children, right?
There are no children.
Of this union.
We've had to disappoint a few people that they can't possibly be the great-great-grandson or great-great-granddaughter of Edgar Allan Poe, because they did not have children. Several cousins. The Poe family was a very large family. The Clem family, a very large family. So lots of Poes and Clems still running around, but no direct descendants.
Mhm. And no other letters from her that she's written, or no stories, or no
None from her.
nothing left that
And
she
it's
might have
amazing.
put her
It's
feelings
amazing.
down.
You have secondhand accounts of her, of what she was like. You have lots of accounts of Edgar's devotion to her, just observing the couple, how well he cared for her, how almost like like an anxious mother hen over a chick, and she's very, very delicate and being very, very careful with her. So you see those accounts, but you don't see anything from her, which has made this a very interesting, sometimes even just maddening kind of exercise, because how did she feel about all of this? The one surviving piece of writing from her is a love poem to her husband a year before her death. One poem, a love poem to her husband a year before her death.
Do you have a copy of that?
We do. If somebody wants to ask another question, I can find the.
That's very interesting. Okay.
I read something in a book that was in the exhibit at the Peabody Library a few years ago about Poe in 20 Objects it was. And there's a chapter, Enrica, on Eleonora, the gift, which this author claims probably was somehow, it was inspired by recognizing her tuberculosis, that he knew about the beginning symptoms because his mother had had it. Is that correct?
His mother had it. His mother died of it. His brother had it. His brother that was likely a contributor to his death. One thing to note, though, tuberculosis was so very common. Consumption was so very common. People were getting wiped out all the time. Death was, obviously death happens all the time, but it was much more in the home. It was much more close. And this is pre-Civil War medicine. This is pre-modern medicine. People died all the time. So he would not have been a stranger to any of this. Now, he was very interested in science. He was very interested in just sort of natural philosophy and science. And so he would have looked into such things. And he was an avid reader, an educated man, and very present in the goings on of his time. So that's another reason. But having it so close to home, I don't think is a coincidence that he would write about these things.
Right.
I see Soren has her hand up.
So, did he have any relationship or friendship with somebody named Henry Watson?
Henry Watson, I'd have to look through.
The reason I'm saying I worked for an agency which the money had come in 1849, $100,000 to Children's Aid.
Okay.
And the request of Henry Watson was that when he dies, that we are supposed to look after his grave. And he wanted to be buried next to Edgar Allan Poe. It's a kind of very slight history, but I've always been curious. They're buried side by side on the off of Green Street, or
Yeah.
I don't believe there's a Henry Watson next to his monument now. There may be one at the back of the cemetery. Again, Poe was buried 3 times in the same cemetery.
Yeah. And there was a car accident. I think both the graves sort of got destroyed, and but he was a bachelor, and we know very little about him. But whatever made him leave the money was very interesting.
I will look into that and see who he may have
There
been.
may be none, but it just was kind of far-fetched.
Oh, Enrica, can you find through your connections with Westminster Hall and the burial ground the history of who was in what plot at what time?
We do actually have, they do have a record, and it's actually quite fascinating that to sort of try to sell the story very, very quickly. Poe was not living in Baltimore when he dies in Baltimore, but because he happened to die in the city where he had family, he could be put in the family's plot. And this is before Westminster Hall was actually built. This is so the graveyard actually precedes the hall.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes. Later, when Poe is buried, there's no stone put on his grave. Now the family insists they commissioned a stone to be put on his grave. It's destroyed in a freak accident, checks in the mail, never makes it there. So 30 years after Poe's death, and the church has now been built in that cemetery, people are kind of upset that there's no proper monument to Poe, marker for Poe. And so a school teacher and her students put together a Pennies for Poe campaign to give Poe a more fitting monument. Committee is formed, the money is raised. But there's not enough room. Now that the church is in the cemetery, Poe's grave is uncomfortably close to the back wall. So they dig him up and they move him over 12 feet on the other side of Reverend Patrick Allison. His grandfather is back there too. So that it seems that if the Poe family plot was very large, it may have been disturbed by the building of the church. But then the monument to be put at that position, people still don't like it because it's still hidden in the back of the cemetery. They want him to be more prominent. So they dig him up again and he's moved to the front, and the monument is then put in the front. So it's got a place of honor at the corner of Fayette and Green Street at the cemetery entrance. So that's why Poe is moved so many times to give him this monument. It's the first monument to an American writer in the United States. A very historical thing that they did, about to reach his 150th anniversary. And that's the reason why Poe is moved around. But that also is the occasion when Mariah Clem can be moved to his side, and Virginia finally has a place to go instead of staying under that scholar's bed. So that's how they're finally reunited. They live together now at the very front of the cemetery. Now, what's interesting is that Elizabeth Cairns Poe, the grandmother whose pension had paid the rent for Poe House, and the family kind of occasioned the entire marriage to Virginia, there's no record of where she's buried. There's no record of her ever been buried there. And because the Poe family is buried there, it seems strange that she would not have been buried next to her husband. So a lot of strange things have been said about Mariah Clem, which is weird given how generous she was to Edgar and how much of a defender and staunch ally she was for him, and how close the family was. She's kind of looked down upon in strange ways. But what she did with her mother's body is a really big question for me. I have no idea where it is, and there's no record in the Westminster Cemetery of that having been there. But other male members of the family, they're noted, but we have a couple of graves that are missing, including Edgar's brother.
So we may not find Mr. Watson, but we could try.
He may be there. I'll have to look in the record, but I do know that there are gaps in the record because we don't know where some of those Poe family members went. The assumption is that when the church was then built, which created these catacombs underneath, if there were any inconvenient bones, they may have been moved under the church when the foundation's put in, but it really is hard to know.
So that's
There was a
Henry
law.
that you
There
can't
was a
find.
law that every October somebody would leave a bottle of liquor.
They do.
and
Oh, yeah, a
flowers.
rose.
For a very long time, they did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They hire someone to do it now. So
Yeah,
it's a tradition. It's a tradition that continues. It's just a little more ceremonial now.
So
here-
you don't know where Henry is buried, is that right?
We do not. He's in there.
Uh-huh. Okay.
He's in there somewhere.
Well, Henry Watson.
No, Henry Poe.
Yeah, Poe. Yeah.
Another figure that I think needs more attention. It's very interesting how close the brothers became. It's very interesting that they were both writers. Poe borrows some lines from his brother's work, and even borrows some of his biography when Poe doesn't really want to tell the truth of his story. He kind of adopts some of the bits from his brother's life, so it indicates a closeness. But Poe is the star, just like a woman who was by his side, and such a cataclysmic thing that happens for the family. So much is not known about Virginia. It's kind of fascinating, but that it's just sort of sucked up into the vacuum of Poe's fame because everybody wants to know about Edgar. So
I had one more quickie question. I wrote down, did you say that Poe died 2 years after Virginia?
he does.
Oh.
He dies 2 years after Virginia under very mysterious circumstances, here in the city of Baltimore.
Yeah, there's always been a mystery whether he died because Hopkins, one of the Hopkins psychologists, had done a lot of study on him.
Was it-
Jameson.
A little
they
bit
think it
like
was-
the identity of Jack the Ripper. There's always a new story or new theory about what killed
Yeah.
Edgar Allan Poe.
So
Exactly.
not possible suicide.
I feel very confident we rule out suicide. Now, self-destruction is something else. But
Okay.
Poe didn't kill himself. We know the timeline, the end of his life. He was found in terrible condition in a tavern. He was taken to a hospital where he dies 4 days later. There's no
Like he-
indication of his committing suicide at the hospital.
The
Okay.
alcohol, I think, was.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Enrica. This has been a fascinating story. and
Wonderful.
so much
Thanks a lot.
Well, I hope people will visit the YouTube and find out some of the other stories that were told during this 200th anniversary of Virginia over the last year, and many other things that are on your website and YouTube, because you've done a lot of other programs. I certainly heard that when we had the celebration for Virginia. I hope the Black Cat Ball and the Poe Festival went beautifully in October.
I'm still standing, so that it is good. But I will say that of all the projects that I've done at Poe House, the Virginia Poe bicentennial this whole year really has been very transformative in terms of how I think of Poe. So,
Thanks for bringing her alive.
Yes, and it will always be a woman who does that for you, right?
Right.
always.
Oh, wait a minute. We have Larry on.
All
We
right.
can't just say that.
So next
Sorry,
time,
Larry.
I will announce, yeah, sorry, Larry. I will announce to the class that next time you will be hearing from Dr. Amy Rosencrantz, the one who Diana spoke to you about doing her research now on the Women's Industrial Exchange, the women of the exchange, and the history of the building, as well as the movement in this country. So I hope you'll be interested in that. Those of you who were with the group last year know that Amy is a great speaker. And so we'll welcome you and look forward to
Yep.
seeing you next.
Pam, she's speaking on next week. Pam,
I thought it was next week,
yeah,
right?
what is she speaking on again?
Oh, what is she speaking on?
Right, not the women's exchange.
Yeah, no, although you can ask her questions in the end,
Yeah,
because I'm sure
right.
she'd be happy to talk about it. Oh, no, it's not next week. It's November 1st. I'm sorry. Next week is Dahomey Women, Power and Poetry of Lucille
That's
Clifton,
right. That's
who
very
was
different.
laureate of
Mhm.
Maryland, and whose daughter lives in Los Angeles, California, working for the Jim Henson Company. And so she's an artist in her own right. And she's going to talk about the poetry and the house that she grew up in, where her mother and her father lived, with, I think, 5 daughters or 5 children,
Mhm.
Baltimore. And they're making it into a place that we might be able to visit someday. So yes, Dahomey Women, that's
That's right.
next week. And then Amy and Sister Mary Melissa Foley.
Right.
So we'll see you then. And thank you for being
Okay.
here today.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Enrique.
Yeah,
Bye, guys.
Enrica,
Yes.
Enrica, could I get your email address?
Do you want?
Bye.
I'll put it in chat.
Yeah, chat, and I can save the chat, Terry, and
okay.
send it to you.
Okay.
But do please, for the last folks who are here, Howard County and the Laurel Museum, you can go visit Virginia at Laurel, and you can go visit Poe at Howard County and see
Oh.
both of the afterlife stories there. So
I'd be interested in Laurel. Mhm.
Yeah, Laurel's a good museum. We have a partnership with them too.
yeah, and Bennett's wonderful over there. So
Yes.
Okay.
and it's-
Well, thank you, Enrica.
thank you guys. Have a good one.
Yes, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
And I will stop the recording.